Hello there, Booktube. So, I've returned to Booktube. I've returned to YouTube, in fact. I posted a video on my main channel, and I'm posting one here as well now. I wanted to just get on and chat about a few little things. I made a more serious video talking about politics and wars and very important topics on my main channel. So, if you're interested in that, go ahead and watch that. But this video is more light-hearted. We're going to talk about reading, and we're going to talk about books, because Booktube is a nice escape from all those really harsh topics. It doesn't always have to be. I mean, we can be reading quite in-depth stuff, and depending on if you're a non-fiction or fiction reader, it can be quite harrowing stuff that you're reading. Like a good example being, I'm just bringing up the Kindle app on my phone now. I recently downloaded the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I wanted to do a bit more research on warfare and modern wars for some of the writing I've been doing, and I've been reading that on my Kindle. Well, it's my phone. I've got a Kindle Fire upstairs, which I read on occasionally. I'm not usually big on non-fiction, so non-fiction reading is something that I tend to steer clear of. I prefer to watch documentaries. I'll listen to podcasts. I'll find lecture series online. That's more the kind of thing I'll do for topics I'm not too close in on. And when it comes to scientific topics, I'll go straight to the source, and I'll read like new scientific papers and things like that, because I like to keep abreast of what's happening in sciences. So I tend not to read much in the way of just straight non-fiction in book form. I'm much more of a novel reader, as you can see behind me. This is my my leather-bound and cloth-bound collectors and special editions. It's a lot of Folio Society stuff, a couple of Barnes and Noble collector's editions in there. I don't think there's anything else on that shelf, actually. I think it's all Barnes and Nobles and Folio Society. I do have others, they're just not in that cabinet. But those, I've decided to use this as a backdrop, because those books behind me I consider to be a good representation of the kind of books I like to talk about, I like to read, I like to focus on, and books that I feel give a good representation of my personality and what I want to project out. I also think they look damn good, which is why they're in a cabinet in my living room facing the main seating area. There's one sofa here, there's one sofa over there, one sofa over there, so people can see what is a reflection of my tastes and my reading preferences. That's a good thing, I think. But yeah, what I want to talk about in this video, though, is just to start things up again, just to get the ball rolling, is general reading. I have recently deleted my Goodreads page, and I've started a new one up. I've not finished it yet. I've been adding every single book. What I've been doing, this has taken me days, by the way. I did not expect it to take days. But what I've been doing is I opened up a spreadsheet, I took a notebook, I started from the age of 12. I did do previous books as well, but I've largely ignored them. Started from the age of 12, I went, right, what books did I read this year? And I just tried to go back through my memory and remember what I did each year, and tried to link that to the books I would have read that year. So, what was I doing in school that year? Did I go on holiday that year? What books did I get for Christmas or birthdays? What books led me to read other books? And by doing that, and spending a couple of days over it, and going back over my collection and talking to family members, I believe I now have a very, very accurate list of every book I've read since I was 12. Now, I'm only considering novels. I haven't put non-fiction in there because, honestly, I cannot remember. If I start including non-fiction, I'm going to have to consider what books I read as a university student over the space of 6 years. And I read a lot of reference books and textbooks over that time that were just, study material. I didn't read them from cover to cover. I picked and chose different parts and I used them as reference material. Do I count those books? Do I count the books where I read the majority of the book, but I was doing it for study? Or do I count a book where I only read half the book? That's the kind of thing where I'm not sure where I'd go with that. So I left non-fiction off. But novel-wise, I've read shockingly low. I thought I was up to around 400 books. I have yet to hit 250. Which is tiny when you consider what Booktube generally pushes. A lot of Booktube channels will push things like reading 100 books in a year. Now, I don't think that's reasonable. I genuinely believe most of the people who claim they're doing that are lying to you. Some of them aren't. Some of them are being genuine. Some genuinely do read 100 books in a year. It's actually very doable. If you read one book every 3 days, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not, you can do that. And if you're reading shorter books, if you're reading, pulp fictions, pulp sci-fis and things like that, which are only around 60,000, 70,000 words, or you're reading dialogue-heavy romances, that's very, very easy to do, because those books take all of about 4 to 5 hours to read for most people. So if you're reading for 2 hours a day, well, you've easily now hit that 100 book mark. But if you're reading for 3 hours a day, well, now you can read a standard 100,000 word novel in 2.5 days. And that's with a standard reading speed. So it's still very, very doable. Like, 3 hours a day would not be that unreasonable if that person doesn't watch TV, for example. If they're not much of a TV watcher, they don't play video games, they don't go out to bars, they're not, they're a more sedentary home-staying kind of person. They're reading, an hour in the morning, they're reading on their lunch break, they're reading for, 2 hours before bed. That's very, very easily doable without it really interfering with your life all that much. It would be one of your major hobbies, but it's doable. Most of the people who do it, though, they're lying. Most of the people are addicted to their phones, they're watching social media for hours and hours every day, they're watching TV, they're going out with friends, they're very invested in fashion, they go to school or college, or they have a full-time job, they have family and friends that they spend time with, they've got other hobbies that they want to engage with. They do not spend 3 hours a day reading, and yet they'll claim, oh, I read 153 books this year. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I don't believe it for a moment. You may have read 150 short stories or short novellas, but you did not read 153 novels, especially when these people claim they read 153. I'm picking a number off the top of my head there. But when they claim they've read 153 novels, and they then pick out doorstop fantasy novels that I know for a fact are over 200,000 words, some over 300,000 words. We're talking the 800-page plus fantasy novel. Same with sci-fi. Or they pick up big classics and they claim they're reading 100 of those in a year. Yeah, they're not doing that. My average so far, from what I've been checking, is around an average of between 10 and 15 books a year, which does not sound like much. I did have a big downswing after university where I read like 4 to 5 books a year. I did not read much after uni. University kind of took the wind out of my sails, made it so I didn't really want to read all that much. I'd spent a lot of time studying. I just wanted to play video games and watch TV, so I did that instead. And I was in my 20s, I was doing martial arts, and I was going swimming, and I was spending time with friends. I didn't have as much free time to spend reading. Whereas the last few years I've read a lot more, and when I was a teenager I read a lot more. I have never had a year where I've read more than 25 books in a year. I don't, as from what I can tell from going over all of my lists, I don't think I've had a year where I've read more than 25 books in a year. But I do tend to read larger books. And what I want to talk about is the nature of reading and how much people read. What I've discovered is that my reading is a lot less than I thought, but it's orders of magnitude more than what most people read. The average person reads shockingly little. The average person doesn't read at all. In America it's even worse, but in Britain, 40% of people never pick up a novel again after they leave education. Never. They never read for pleasure ever again. So that tells you something. If 40% of the population has read 0 books a year, every year since adulthood, well, that's going to immediately change the averages. But even then, the average person beyond that reads less than 3 books per year. So even if we discount the people who don't read, the people who say they do read less than 3 books a year on average. That's tiny. That's less than the number of books I was reading during my reading slump years, where I openly said I didn't read. I read 4 to 5 books a year in those years. And I read big books. Those were the years that I read books like Infinite Jest and Game of Thrones. These are not small books. Admittedly, those were in my early 20s. That's the reason I read books like Infinite Jest. So I was in my early 20s and I was kind of talked into it by more pretentious people who thought it was a very important book. If I'd been given that book this year, I definitely wouldn't have read it. Same with Gravity's Rainbow, which, oh my god, I cannot believe I got through that. I read that the same year I read Game of Thrones, which makes me wonder what I was on that year that made me think, yeah, let's read these 2 very, very different books when I didn't read that year, outside of those books, largely. And I didn't read much the previous year. For some reason, I picked up these 2 mammoth books and read them anyway. One of which I actively hated, but I still stuck it out and read it. I think that goes to show just how much being around geeks and nerds who read a lot can push you to finish a book if enough of your friends and social circle seem to speak highly of it. Anyway, what I wanted to get at is that if you read almost anything, you're ahead of the curve. And that's good. That's a good thing. You should focus on that. The Booktube and Booktok influencers that try to push this idea that they read hundreds of books every year, that they've read thousands of books, most of them are lying. Most of them are either outright lying, or they skimmed, or they played the audiobook on fast forward. They haven't actually read. The people who do read that much, that's their main hobby. And people like me who have read a couple of hundred books in their life, I'm almost 40, I'm 37, almost 38. And I'm approaching 40 and I've read a little over 200 books. That's not a lot, but that's 200 books that I've sat and I've read and I've enjoyed and I can discuss in detail. I can talk about these books and I can talk about them properly. If you sit there and just pour through the words until there's nothing left, and then pick up the next book and keep doing the same, you're not going to retain anything. You're not going to really get anything out of it. So sit and enjoy your books and don't try to push to be the big reader. Don't make this into a competition. I think one of the biggest problems with Booktube is that Booktube has become competitive and it's become a consumerist kind of offshoot. It's not necessarily about buying books, though that is a big point. It is about consuming books, about being seen to have read more than most, being seen to have a huge bookcase behind you filled with books that you've read, when in actual fact most of the booktubers have a big bookcase filled with books behind them, most of which they've not read, and most of which they bought brand new just for background decoration. When you're reading and you're engaging with Booktok and Booktube, Booktube especially, because Booktok is extremely toxic, I'll be making other videos about them. Don't let this need to keep up with the Joneses overrule what it is you want to do with books. Sit and read a book and enjoy it. Spend a few weeks on it. Spend time really getting to grips with it. And I think that's the message that I want to send. And that's the first thing I want to say to my return to Booktube is, let's enjoy our books. Let's read them slowly if we want to. Let's savour them. And let's not worry too much about the people who claim they read hundreds of books when they clearly don't. Let's just read some books and have some fun. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.